Music. It's good to see so many of you here today and to celebrate what all the youngsters have done. And I've got one message which really builds on the messages that you've had from Sue Bradley and from Stuart Killick. And that is, if you want to do something, you can. You probably have to work hard. You've certainly got to have support and encouragement. But what you've got to do to realise your dreams is seize the opportunities that are presented to you. And I think we've seen so far today the sorts of opportunities that Stover gives you, and I'm sure from the youngest pupils to those that have already left, the opportunities have been great for you here, and you've been able to capitalise on those opportunities. But really it's just the start, isn't it, as you go on into your leaving school and go on into your careers. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my career, which you've heard a little bit about from Stuart, but I'll go into a little bit more detail and just show you, or try and demonstrate to you, the sort of opportunities that I've had. I can't say that my career path was that well planned in terms of I'm going to do this and that's where I'm headed and that's what I'm going to do. But I was brought up in a farm in the Midlands, in Stafford. I loved maths and physics, that was what I wanted to do. Went to an all-girls school and I wanted to go to university. That was my prime motivation, to go to university. And didn't really want to do maths, and I didn't really want to do physics, but I enjoyed both of them. So the obvious choice was to do engineering. Now, no one from my school had done engineering before, so it was all a little bit of an unknown. But I got an interview at Exeter University, came down to Exeter, was offered a place, and I was given every opportunity and every encouragement by my school, and particularly by my parents, to go for it. But it was a bit strange for a girl, we're going back now to the early 70s, to do engineering. Now it's much more common, and I hope there are going to be a lot of girls from Stover who go on and do engineering. My degree went very well. Again, I had lots of support at university. Didn't quite know what I wanted to do because I'd done engineering science, and I think most people don't actually understand what engineering is all about at a professional level. So lots of different strands. There's mechanical engineering, civil engineering, electrical engineering, electronic engineering, and it goes on and on and on, lots of engineering fields. And I did engineering science because I didn't know which particular field of engineering I wanted to go into. So having done engineering science, and I got a good degree, so the obvious choice was to do research. And one of the research areas at Exeter was the artificial hip. Now, I don't know if any of you got grandparents who perhaps had an artificial hip, but we're going back to the 70s when it was very new and there weren't very many hip operations done, replacement hips. And I worked on the Exeter hip, which is now the most installed, I understand, the most installed hip in the world. So if you do have a relative who's had a replacement hip, just ask them whether it is the Exeter hip, which was developed in Exeter. It was an absolutely fascinating piece of research that I was doing, but if I tell you that the bit of research I was doing was on bone cement, and that's, if you imagine your leg and the femur fits it, the replacement bit fits into your femur, and it's held in by bone cement, and I was working on bone cement. Polymethyl methacrylate it's called. And at that time I found it perhaps a narrow field of research. I was paid for by an American company, the world was my oyster, but it seemed a bit narrow, perhaps the wrong decision, but I decided academia was not for me and I would go elsewhere. So what do you do in that position? You've decided to do research and then you give it up and, ooh, which way do I go? So I found, in the holidays, I'd worked on the M5 motorway, which was being constructed, so you can tell how long ago that was, just outside Exeter. And I phoned up my old boss and said, I wonder if you could give me a reference, because that's obviously your starting point for looking for a job, is to get a reference. Good CV, everyone, make sure you get a good CV. All your prizes, make sure those go down on your CV that hopefully you're starting to put together now. I phoned him up and I said, could you give me a reference? And he said, I'd be very pleased to give you a reference, but I do have a job here if you'd like to come back. So that was I suppose, one of my first big opportunities. So I didn't dither around, I just said yes, and off I went to work back on the motorway. Which is, again, I was the only girl there, so that was quite exciting, and we used to go up and down the motorway on the wrong side in one of the, we had a long wheelbase Land Rover, which I used to enjoy driving up the wrong way on the motorway, which just gives you a bit of a buzz, I suppose. So that was my start of my career in civil engineering. So I've been in medical engineering for a while, now I've gone on to civil engineering. And from the motorway I went to work for Teignbridge District Council, who at that time, and maybe now, had a very good career structure for training engineers, and I wanted to become a chartered civil engineer. Now, any of you who are going towards engineering as a career and thinking of a degree, make sure that the university you go to has accreditation for their degree by the institutions, so that when you come out with your degree, you can then go on to be chartered, and that's a very important step. It's a bit like chartered accountancy. You need to make sure that you get chartered so you can go up the ladder within the profession. My career progressed well, and you've heard a little bit about it. I've worked on airport buildings in Southern Africa, Mauritius, Seychelles, so quite exotic locations. Schools, hospital heritage buildings, the prison kitchen at Exeter, which was rather a different foray for me. Most design that you do in engineering, so if you were designing this building, you design it for the school, you design it to be an open space, you design it so the acoustics worked, so it's a pleasing place to be. Prison's very different. Everything you design is from a security point of view. And I found it quite difficult actually, because obviously a prison is to keep people in. So all the design was about keeping people in and making sure the walls were 5.2, sad, isn't it? I can remember how high it was, 5.2 metres high, round the external. Had to be a certain distance away from the wall so the prisoners couldn't jump out and escape. It was an interesting job to work on, but I have to say, not one I wanted to sort of pursue. So I became qualified as a chartered civil engineer, and I became chartered as a structural engineer. Two slightly different strands. I tend to think of structural engineering as a more, it's like the consultant of civil engineering, if I can put it that way, in the medical stage. So one's general, the other's more specific. So went on to structural engineering. And quite interesting really, having started on medical engineering, all about the body, but actually the body is a structure. So it wasn't that dissimilar to go into structural engineering from an engineering mathematical point of view. Having got chartered, my husband and I got married in the interim. My husband and I decided we'd have children. The company I worked for at that time was an international company, lots of offices in Africa, offices in this country, but they'd never had a pregnant engineer before. That was a first for them. So I looked at what I was doing for the company, what sort of work I was doing, and sorted out the work strands I thought I could do on a part-time basis. And I went to them and said, would that be okay? Could I work for you on a part-time basis? Now, looking back now as an employer, I know that having spent all that money training someone, having got them to the level of experience that I was at, you actually don't want to lose those people. So if you are ever in that position, don't be afraid of saying, I could do this job on a part-time basis, because there's generally an opportunity to do that. So I worked part-time for 7 years, and then so I was with the same company all the time. and they said to me, would you like to be a divisional director? And I said yes, that would be very good. The only snag was I had to go back full time, so that's what I did. Going back to the 1990s now, the early 1990s, there was a recession. From my point of view, more difficult than the recession we've just hopefully coming through. And our office in Exeter, I was running an office of 20 people, and the decision was taken to close that office, and I was made redundant. So that's quite a blow. Felt fairly bleak at the time, I have to be honest, but actually was probably the biggest opportunity I was given. So sometimes things that look really bad can actually open doors and give you opportunities. So try and remember that as you go through your careers, that sometimes the bad things can turn into good things. Perhaps there is a silver lining. Anyway, I set up my own company, worked from home, earned as much money that first year as I had as a divisional director, so that made me feel quite good. And then 3 years later, I was still working on my own, so I wasn't employing anyone else, I was just working on my own. And I got together with someone who I'd worked with over the years, and we set up BSW Consulting in Exeter. And we've grown to 12 people now, so over the last whatever number of years it is. But that came as an opportunity because I was on the Institution of Structural Engineers branch committee. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? In short, ISTRUCT-E. And my colleague Ian was chairman at the time, and he said he was leaving his company and setting up on his own. So I said, well, if you want any advice about setting up on your own, you know, give me a ring. Went back that night, and I thought, perhaps there's an opportunity here, perhaps there is. So I phoned him up and said, would you like a spot of lunch? So we went out for lunch, made a proposition to him to get together, and basically we haven't looked back since then. But he does say that he got taken over before he'd even set up. So. As I said, I was involved with the local branch of the Institution of Structural Engineers, and they decided, they were asked to put names forward for the council in London. If I tell you the Institution of Structural Engineers has 25,000 members and they're in 105 countries. It's the qualifying body for structural engineers, so if you go to university, as I say, and do engineering, then that degree in engineering, if it was a civil engineering degree or a structural engineering degree, would be accredited by the institution. But then in addition to that, you take a 7-hour exam to become a chartered structural engineer. So it's qualifying at degree level and then qualifying later on at chartership level. There are technician grades as well and associate member grades, but chartership is the way that I went. So my name was put forward by the branch to go on the council in London, which was a great honour. I was told, you'll never get in. No one from Devon and Cornwall ever gets in, but you know, we've got to put a name forward, so that was fine. Name got put forward. We're going back at the sort of time when all the papers from the institution came out addressed to dear gentlemen. So you can see that women weren't very much on the horizon of the institution at that time. Went to the election, and I topped the poll. Couldn't believe it. So this, you'll never get in from Devon and Cornwall, was not quite right. So that was great. I got onto the council of this august body in London, and then I found out I was pregnant. So I thought, phoned them up. I said, I'm really sorry. The election procedure and so on is a very long process. I wasn't pregnant at the start of the process. I am pregnant now, and the baby will be born before the first meeting. Really sorry, I can't do it. They said, no, you can do it. Right, okay. I said, whatever you need, we will put on for you. If you need childcare, whatever you need, please accept. So this was another opportunity for me that if I could take it, then, you know, maybe it would advance my career. It would certainly be interesting to be at the institution in London. You've got to remember that then I have the opportunity of being with the top engineers from all over the world, and I mean all over the world. So I saw it as a great opportunity. I went up to London. My husband came with me. Adam, my little boy, was 3 weeks old, so it was quite a jaunt to go up to London and be part of this big meeting, all men, was quite a thing. But it was a fantastic opportunity, and that's what I must emphasise to you. Whatever stage you're at, whether you're at school or just left school, take those opportunities. You don't know quite where they might lead, but do take those opportunities. Go forward a little bit, and I worked my way through the committee structure at the institution. I'm one of these people who doesn't sit quietly, and that's perhaps another lesson. Put your head above the parapet, and then you get noticed. I'm seeing some knowing looks around the room when I say that. And if you don't agree with things, then say. And I took a little bit of stick because I wanted to change the whole way the institution was looking at the gender balance, so that women could become engineers. It was expected that men and women would become engineers, so there was a whole job of work to do there. And sometimes I was told to sit down, and I didn't sit down. And I think that's something else you must remember. If you believe in something, then that's what you should do, and stand up and be counted, if you like. So I became president of the Institution of Structural Engineers. It didn't happen just like that, obviously, but I became president of the institution. I was really, really lucky in that it was a centenary year of the institution. So it had been 100 years, no female presidents, and then I became president. The year was absolutely fantastic. I travelled the world. I saw the Bird's Nest Stadium in Beijing. I think quite a few of you from Hong Kong, maybe China, I don't know. But I went to Hong Kong and to China. Opened a conference in India, dressed in a sari, which was quite an experience. I opened an exhibition in Brisbane, in Australia. Went on television in Trinidad, went to Tobago, Barbados. And one of the main things was we had our institution conference for the whole institution in Hong Kong. So I opened the conference, and it was a bit daunting. You know, I'm a structural engineer from Devon, and so I didn't sort of feel this great, you know, I designed the Burj, the tallest building in the world, or the Bird's Nest, but the people who had were in the audience, you know, and I was opening it, so it was quite daunting. It went really well. We had a fantastic conference, I had a fantastic time. And another great event was Women's International Day in South Africa. And I went to a breakfast meeting in Johannesburg, and it was attended by women contractors. Now, I don't know if any of you are in civil engineering contracting, but there aren't many women in civil engineering contracting. So I was expecting about 8 people, and I walked into this room, and there were about 150 women contractors. And most of the meetings I go to, and please don't take offence, men in the audience, but it's grey suits, middle-aged men, fairly staid. This was young women, painted faces, flowers on the table. It was just such a different environment. It was so uplifting. And then when they gave the awards, you know how we all clap very nicely, as we've done today, they ululated. Now, some of you will know what that means, and I will just try it now. A bit like that, but if you imagine that this whole room is doing that, it was absolutely fantastic. During my presidential year, I was also given an honorary doctorate by Exeter University, and that's my university, so I was really privileged to have that, which was great. But it gave me another fantastic opportunity, and that was to go on the council at Exeter University.